is Terry Bradshaw, quarterback, Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
Looking. He's under the gun. He's tied. He throws. It is.
April is in our rearview mirror as we are taking a deep dive into the May 5th, 1975 issue of Sports Illustrated here on the Past Our Prime podcast. Tennis, anyone? Jimmy Connors on the cover as he and John Newcomb duke it out on the tennis courts. Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Johnson. Got Bill Mahoney and Mark Hoffman here with me as always. And guys, 50 years ago, Mr. Happy, Jimmy Connors, making friends wherever he goes, got me to thinking. Who is the most difficult athlete or most difficult encounter you have ever had with an athlete? And as per usual, I'll let you guys think about it for a bit. I'll go first. And it wasn't necessarily a difficult, like there was no animosity or anything, but I did spring training feeds for the Angels for years and years. And right when I about started was right when Garrett Anderson came up. And Garrett did not like to talk to the media. And even when he did, which is funny because like a lot of these guys, when their playing days are over, what do? They become a part of the media.
They change their tune.
Yeah. But in spring training in Tempe for the Angels, you had to go into the clubhouse, get them to agree to do an interview, and then you had to ask them to come out of the clubhouse. And it was basically a way that the team made it to where players could say no much easier. I mean, like if you're getting a guy coming off the field, but once they're in the clubhouse, it's like pulling teeth. So Garrett just was having no part of it. And finally, the year Mo Vaughn came to the Angels, I was asking Garrett, and he was hemming and hawing, "No, man, I don't want it." And Mo Vaughn was like, "What are you doing right now?" And Garrett kind of looked at him, and, Mo's this 5'11", 250-pound hulk of a dude. And Garrett's like, well, nothing right now. And Mo looks at me and goes, "He'll do it. He'll be right out." And I was like, ooh, new sheriff in town. So I like that. But Billy, you tried to get Garrett for us one time, and it was a long battle.
And I lost that battle. 7 straight days, man. You sent me out to the Angels, and I confronted him on the field, in the clubhouse. And it finally got back to me that he had said that he won't do interviews with guys that aren't there all the time. He doesn't want to just do it with one guy that sees the team once. So you put me there for those days. On the 7th day, it was raining. So I went out and sat in the Tempe stands in the rain. And there he walks by, like right on the field next to where I'm sitting. He just looks at me and shakes his head and goes, "Oh, man." Still said no.
Still said no. So you were there every day.
Yeah. I was there 7 days in a row. I don't know. Maybe he's thinking every day of the season, I guess.
Mark, what about you? You got one?
Well, there's so many to pick from. I mean, there was the time I tried to do Shaq when he was playing for the Orlando Magic, do a PSA for the team. And then I tried to ask him some questions about his career, and he obviously didn't want to do it because his 2-word answers always include drink Coke, drink Pepsi, whatever. It was an advertisement. And there was Larry Bird after a game once who I was asking him about a foul that was called, and he grilled me back. "Well, was that a foul?" And I go, "Well, I don't know. What do you?" He said, No, I'm asking you. Do you think that was a foul?" So I was like on the defense right there. But I'd have to say, number one, spring training, and you guys know, I had to do a lot of Cubs, and it was Mr. Marlon Byrd. I tried to get him the first day, and he said, "Well, I can't do it now. Check with me later, okay? Or go out." So I checked with him later, and he goes, "Nah, it's still not a good time." And instead of going, "Okay, that's fine. I'll be here all week, and maybe later in the week he'll be able to do it," I went, and he looked at me, and I was toast. Every day after that, I asked him, no. There was no dancing around it. So
isn't that funny? I mean, like Garrett Anderson obviously had a very nice, good, long career. Marlon Byrd was okay. I think he had like a 1 or 2 year where he was. But you would never think Marlon Byrd would be the guy you couldn't get. Never in a million years.
Well, and again, Marlon might be the nicest guy in the world. I just ticked him off or he was in bad mood or whatever. And I tell the story of Rod Carew where, one time I tried to interview him and he cussed at me, and another time after a loss, in fact, he spit out his toothpaste, came out and did a wonderful interview. So you just don't know when you hit the players. And in today's society with social media, you get to a celebrity or an athlete and they're negative to you, then you post it all over and make it seem like that's the way the guy is all the time,
Right.
which is incorrect.
Right. It might be incorrect. Some guys have reputations that they have earned, but
Right.
yeah, you're right. I had the same thing with Carew. Kind of standoffish, but then once I got him, man, just a gentle soul.
Chili Davis was like that. Chili Davis hated to do interviews, but when I got him going, he was fantastic.
Yeah. Yep. Billy, you got anyone from the Seahawks?
I'll make it. Yeah. AJ Pierzynski.
Oh,
I remember that. AJ was tough for the many years I was around him, but the first year he got acquired by the Giants, by the White Sox was 05. So the first days of spring training, I go to him and I say, AJ, get a few minutes with you. He goes, oh, I am busy right now. Well, I had nothing to do that day. So he does his practice, comes back. I said, AJ, get you now. He goes, no, I got to eat lunch. I said, okay. Goes and eat lunch, comes out from lunch. I'm still there. I said, AJ, get a couple minutes with you now. He goes, no. I got to go work out. He goes to work out, comes to work out. I said, AJ, get a couple minutes with you. He goes, no. I gotta go shower. I said, okay. He came out of the shower. Mind you, it's been since 7 in the morning. It's about 1 o'clock now. He comes out in rage. What do you want from me? Why are you still here? I said, I told you I need a few minutes with you. You're the White Sox big acquisition this year. I think the fans would want to get to know you. Throws his stuff in his little locker, turns around and goes, okay, greatest interview ever.
Yeah.
He knew, man. He would give a speech at the beginning of spring training every year. He'd go, I don't like doing this. I'm sick of this stuff. You guys twist everything. I don't even know why I do it with you. And then 2 minutes later, he'd do the best interview for 15 minutes.
Yeah. And speaking of guys who now you can't, he's everywhere now that his career's over.
That goes in, I passed. Joe Creedy in softball.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Joe Creedy. Can I, what kind of questions will these be?
These are softball questions, Joe. Real easy. Softball? I don't know anything about softball.
Oh, boy.
I'm just trying to make them easy. Lob it in. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Scorecard. Mark, you tell us about the attendance for opening day and the Oakland A's back in 75, the 3-time defending world champions.
Yeah, you would figure if you won the World Series 3 years in a row, you got a packed house for opening day. Nope, not in Oakland. Their opening day crowd, 17,477. Now, it could be a Bay Area thing because the Giants' opening day was 17,649. But it's not a Bay Area thing because the San Jose Earthquakes of the North American Soccer League, they had over 18,000 at their opening day. So that's a packed house for soccer stadium. So go figure. But I mean, the A's always had issues drawing people no matter how well they played.
They did, especially back in those days when you would think winning is everything, and it's a flamboyant, highly entertaining winning team. I mean, you couldn't ask for a more engaging team than Catfish and Rudy and Bando and Reggie and Campy and Vida. I mean, the names are just historical names, but the town back then did not like Charlie Finley. Nobody liked Charlie Finley. And when we had Jason Turbo on, who wrote the book about those A's, he said that Finley, promised that he would get engaged with the community and he would never show up, and the town held him accountable, and they just wouldn't come out to the park. It's kind of crazy. They did come out to A's games in the late 80s. They averaged over 2 million a year in those Bash Brother years with Canseco and McGuire. And in 89 or 90, they had about 2.9 million. So that was before the Raiders moved back and made center field, Mount Davis and look crazy. And even in the 2000s when they were good, they would get about 2 million again. But once this new ownership came and they turned bad, oh boy, it was not good. Not
What,
good.
what drove me crazy was baseball stadiums were also used for football because, like in September, you'd have a football game, like the Raiders playing, and you could clearly see the baseball diamond in the middle of the football field.
Oh
And
yeah,
it just drove me crazy. I don't know why. I just did not like it.
yeah.
Scott, when you mentioned about Fenway, though, Scott, you said he didn't get involved in the community. He never even moved.
No,
He stayed in Chicago. He didn't pack up. He only would come out there at certain times and do everything by phone.
that's right.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean he was
I
a non what do they call a non-existent landlord basically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Bill, they said it.
Ron Bloomberg, he's the DH for the Yankees. He says, with Barry Bonds in right field and 3 first basemen, I might as well donate my gloves to charity.
And not only is he the DH, he was the first DH
Mhm.
in baseball history back in '73. We all grew up basically with a DH in the American League, at least. The National League fans are still kind of coming to grips with it, but American League fans have known for over 50 years now about a DH. And yeah, Ron Bloomberg, the very first one.
And you know what he did in that very first at bat as a DH? He walked against Louis Tiant with the bases loaded on April 6th, 1973.
Wow.
But I mean, the thing I remember about Ron Bloomberg, he was one of the few Jewish players in baseball, and in 2007 he actually managed a baseball team in Israel. So I think he's like in the Jewish Sports Hall of Fame or something.
That would make sense.
You'd have to include Hank Greenberg, famous Tigers first baseman Rod Carew, converted.
Yep.
Brad Osmus, well, maybe not Brad Osmus.
Sandy Koufax.
Sandy Koufax, definitely.
Yeah. Jackpot for Jimbo, our cover story this week. Jimmy Connors, the world's top-ranked and least liked player on the tour, taking on John Newcomb in a made-for-TV challenge match. No love lost between the brash 22-year-old Connors and the 30-year-old Aussie Newcomb. Something always seemed to be bothering the Connors camp, and before the match, he wanted a few changes. Mark, Jimmy wanted to buy up all the good seats. Why?
Well, he was tired of fans rooting against him. So he didn't want to see those fans rooting against him. I don't understand why he would think that way. Why would Jimmy Connors think that he would rub fans the wrong way? I don't get it. But no, he just got tired of that. I mean, there was apparently Tootie Fields was a comedian or whatever, was like booing him, and at one point he made an obscene gesture towards Tootie Fields or Toady Fields. So yeah, Jimmy was tired of that. So, but they didn't agree to do that with him. He says, nope, we're filling those stands. And if you don't like it, you don't like it.
And God forbid he could be like, you know what? Instead of having to buy 1,000 seats or whatever, I could just simmer down a little bit. But that wasn't in the cards for him.
Yeah, but McEnroe probably had a worse temper than Connors.
I would think so. Yeah. Hard to believe, but yeah. Bill, Connors also didn't like the surface, or he wanted it changed at least. What was the big deal with the surface?
Well, he came out and said that surface, like you just said, he wants it over. It's done, because the match was to be played on an old version of the Supreme Court. Now, no, but before Mark mentions, it's not about judges and gavels with long beards. The Supreme Court refers to a specific type of tennis court surface, specifically a rubber mat or synthetic surface. So Jimmy Connors says, I want it changed, because the last time it was a fairly fast carpet in which Connors beat Rod Laver. But against Newcomb, we all know Newcomb has a pretty hard serve. He wants a much harder. He wants a newer version of the Supreme Court with a rougher surface that might slow down Nuke's cannonballs, as he liked to call his serve. But Newcomb said, not a chance. He goes, this is the same court they used for the Laver match. This is the court I was told I would practice on this weekend. I will make no more concessions for Jimmy Connors. As far as I'm concerned, this is my Alamo. Mark knows a lot about the Alamo.
I do. And it didn't end well for the Texans that were there.
And this
Spoiler alert.
Oh, this didn't end well for Jimmy. Well, it did actually. He lost both challenges, but he won the match. He wins the first set. Newcomb evened it up by winning the second set, but Connors closed it out, winning the last two sets, 6-2 and 6-4. He wins an enormous payday for back in 1975. $500,000 was really unheard of. Newcomb does okay as well, leaving with 300 grand. He says serving to him, meaning Connors, is like pitching to Hank Aaron. If you don't mix it up, it's going out of the ballpark. Is Jimmy the best? He was asked. I don't think you can dispute that now. So, we grew up. Jimmy Connors had a great career in the late 70s into the 80s, but that is like when McEnroe and Borg and Lendl, there were other people. His peak was right around 74, 5, and 6 when he was the number one player in the world, hands down. No one else could even. It was news when someone would win a set off of him. It might as well be fall. This is a little pictorial on Oklahoma Sooners spring football, and it's quite a difference between then and now, isn't it, Bill?
Oh, it sure is. Back in 1975, 20,000 people came out to the OU spring football. Last year, 2024, I'll say, 48,861 fans still go out there. And having lived near the Oklahoma border, they're insane. I don't care what they do with the spring football, all the fans will still come out and find a way to get out and watch those players play. They love their OU football there.
And they'd better like it or go to it soon, Mark, because spring football could be coming to an end.
That is true. USC canceled they didn't hold the spring football game, and a lot of teams just do practices now. It's not that big of a deal anymore to the fans. I mean, Oklahoma's different because Oklahoma's football crazy, and before the Thunder moved, they didn't have any kind of professional sports team there. But I think Sooners doesn't stand for like when they would race those covered wagons to get like spots. And the sooner you got to the spot, the sooner you own that piece of property, you could put dibs on that property. I think Sooners now stand for sooner or later you're going to be an Oklahoma football fan, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's go from the Dust Bowl to the ice rink with a little help from his friends. 1942, Toronto became the first team in NHL history to come back from a 3-0 deficit in the Stanley Cup playoffs when they beat the Detroit Red Wings in 7. In fact, they remain the only team ever to win a championship in any sport after being down 3-0 in the finals. 33 years later, 1975, Penguins up 3-0 on the Islanders. And what happened, Bill?
Well, the Islanders came back to beat them in 7 games, led by their goaltender, Glenn Chico Resch, who people say looks a little like Freddie Prinze of Chico and the Man. And if you look at him, he actually does look a little like him. But Freddie Prinze had a little help, or excuse me, Chico Resch had a little bit of help. Yeah, Freddie Prinze was playing for the Islanders too at that time. So you guys know. That's what was weird. They couldn't tell the difference. Oh, if Freddie's in goal, Glenn's in goal, no idea. But Chico Resch had some help there. In the last 4 games, the Penguins shot the puck or fired the puck past Resch 13 times. 9 times the puck ricocheted off the posts.
Oh.
So basically, he was fortunate, but hey, that's what happens. The Kings are finding that out. But in the last 4 games, he faced 132 shots, made 132 saves.
Wow.
So not bad for the Islanders, not good for the Penguins.
No. Hey, everything's coming up roses. The Derby is a week away and the field is wide open, not because there isn't a dominant horse in the field, quite the opposite. There's about 5 or 6 horses that have the credentials to win. It's a wide open race. Foolish Pleasure might go off as the favorite. He's only lost 1 time in his 11 races leading up to the Derby, but that was in the Florida Derby, and he had his stiffest competition. So we'll see if Jacinto Vasquez, the Hall of Fame jockey, can ride Pleasure to a victory in the Derby. That's next week coming up on the Past Our Prime podcast. Tearing his way up from nowhere is our next story. Houston McTear, an 18-year-old sprinter from the backwoods of Florida, has run the 100 in 9.3 6 times. He's beaten the Russians, has his eye on the Olympics. This kid can fly. As a 14-year-old, he won a junior high 100-yard dash in a time of 9.8 seconds. That was without any starting blocks. Now 18, he is one of the most promising sprinters in America. He's run a 9.300 this year to equal the national high school record. And man, Bill, this kid came from nothing.
Yeah, he grew up just in just poverty. I mean, I'm trying to think of the word that goes before poverty. Is there anything lower than that? They said he lived by a river and there were some heavy rains. And basically, the river went so big or got so high that it left 5 inches of water in their house. And they said the mosquitoes were so big there that they'd carry you off. Houston McTerr didn't have the type of outfits, the type of clothing. He had pretty much nothing growing up, and he still turned out to be one of the most amazing, underrated track stars in the world.
Running was his life, and a way out of that life that he seemed destined towards. His father, Eddie McTerr, said, "I'm proud of him. I hope he makes it. Then maybe he won't have to work in a sawmill the rest of his life." The guy can fly, but Mark, the old saying is, if you didn't have bad luck, you'd have no luck at all, and that really applies to Houston. What happened as he was prepping for the 76 games in Montreal?
Well, it doesn't help if you're a sprinter or any athlete that relies on speed and your last name ends in Tear, T-A-R, T-A-D-E-A-R. I can spell. Anyway, he's like training for the Olympic trials in 76. He's probably going to win gold if he gets to the Olympics. Instead, he tears his Achilles tendon. He's done. And then 4 years later, he's ready to qualify for the 1980 Olympics. He's ready to finally get that gold medal. Nope, we boycotted because of Russia's invasion in Afghanistan. And then, after track, he kind of fell into drugs. He was homeless for 3 years in the 1980s. He ended up marrying a Swedish sprinter, and he lived in Sweden. He dies of cancer in 2015, lung cancer, which is interesting from a speed track guy. And then his wife, the other sprinter, she died 3 weeks after him, also of cancer. So you're right. If it wasn't for bad luck, he'd have no luck at all.
Yeah, died at the age of 57. You know that this guy was a stud in that he didn't ever participate in the Olympics. It wasn't like he was on TV all the time, and yet we all know who this guy is.
Right.
He was a name. Sprinters were big back then. I mean, after Usain Bolt, who wasn't American, can you guys name the top sprinter in the world right now, or a top American sprinter? I can't.
No. Well, you look at the picture in Sports Illustrated, and sprinters are muscular, and you look at his calves, and they look like giant grapefruits are the back of his leg. The muscles are just enormous.
What I was thinking with Mark saying about his calf and how much in shape and great shape he was. When I was 1980, I was roughly 15 years old. So when they boycotted the Olympics, I thought, well, that's the way it goes. We got to do what we got to do. But now as you get older, you look back and realize all these people, not just McTerr, but all the other athletes that had trained for this their whole life, you don't know what would have happened with their lives if they were able to play in those 1980 Olympics. We don't know if McTerr would have won 3 gold medals and all of a sudden been the face of Wheaties and things would have turned out. So it is tough that actually happened for all these athletes.
Oh, no question. We've talked about this in the past, but the Olympics are that rare event where if you're 22 and that's your prime as a sprinter as you're heading into the Olympics, and then you get injured, and the next you're 26, and the 22-year-old is now, you have that small window to hit it, and to have it taken from you either by injury or boycott is it's tragic. It really is. Decline of a brave new world. Atlanta was the 16th biggest TV market in 1975. They were a hotbed for sports, and then they weren't. Fans stopped showing up at games, but none of this deterred Ted Turner. The 35-year-old tycoon owns WTCG and shows all kinds of sports. And a few years later, the call letters would change to WTBS, and the sports world was forever changed.
And he bought a UHF station and people that don't understand now, VHF was like where you'd see ABC, NBC, CBS, the main networks. And if you had stations in your town, they were all on that kind of frequency. Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 7. UHF was like Channel 32, Channel 44, was different frequency. And you had to turn your television to like the UHF channel. And the White Sox in the 60s, they were on WGN with the Cubs in 1967. So, and I don't know how they juggled it, I guess because the Cubs play day games, but all the games were televised. But in 68, they moved to UHF. and all their games for the next 10 years or whatever were in UHF. And the signal wasn't as strong. But Turner buys this UHF station and then petitions to use a satellite to transmit, and that starts the superstation. The whole concept of WTBS, TBS, everything's born out of this idea.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, as a kid in the 80s, WGN and WTBS were just fantastic for sports fans in the summer. You could watch a Cubs game on GN at 11:20 in the morning. That ends around 2 o'clock. Go out and play a little ball, come back, watch a Braves game that starts at 4. Then you'd have a Dodgers or an Angels game at 7. And for the first time ever, you had access to watching live baseball multiple times a day. Harry Carey became bigger than life. You knew all the Braves announcers, Don Sutton, Pete Van, Warren,
Joe Simpson,
and Skip Carey. I mean,
yep.
You knew the Braves. The Braves were not a very good team back then, but you knew them.
You did.
Rick
I used to
Mailer
watch them.
Rick Mailer seemed to start every game for him at that.
Yeah, them and Rick Russell.
Yeah, Russell for the Cubbies. So, yeah, it was great when it first started. So,
yep.
The low-key, high-stakes invitational. Al Geiberger beats Jack, Johnny, Gary Lee, and a host of others in the Tournament of Champions at La Costa, which is down towards where you grew up, Billy, right?
Yeah, well, Dana Point, about 60 miles.
Yeah,
60 miles south of there.
But I wanted to say Geiberger is famous for one thing. Do you know what that is?
No.
He turned pro the year I was born, 1959.
Well, it is a 59. 14 golfers have shot a 59 on the PGA Tour. Geiberger is not only one of them, he was the first one ever to shoot a 59. He shot it in Memphis in 1977. Jim Furyk shot a 59 in 2013, and in 2016, he's the only golfer ever to shoot a 58, and he didn't win either tournament.
Wow.
But yeah, Geiberger, I had forgotten that he was the first guy. Tiger never shot a 59. I mean, it really takes, you basically have to birdie, basically every hole.
Every hole, yeah.
59,
Yeah, and it's like the week after the Masters, no one cares about golf. It's like you've had this adrenaline rush of the Masters, and now it's like, oh, what's happening this week?
Yep.
So it's like, some team is just beating their arch rival, and then the next week they're playing some pansy, and or patsy, I should say.
Yes.
And yeah, it's hard to get up. And this is from a fan's point of view, not the golfer's point of view, fan's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, for sure. America, meet Fred Lynn. In 1975, the 23-year-old took Boston and the entire baseball world by storm right out of the gate. He wins the center field job in spring training, and he never let it go. He's being compared to both Ted Williams and Carl Yastrzemski, fairly or not. The one thing Teddy Ballgame or Yaz did was never win a championship, and all hopes are now square on the shoulders of a rookie who has played less than 2 months in the majors at this point. The AL East was supposed to come down to the Orioles and Yankees in 75, but they weren't counting on this second-round pick from USC to make such an impact so fast. He had help. Jim Rice, Dwight Evans were just getting started. In fact, Rice would go on to finish third in the MVP voting and second in Rookie of the Year. So the Red Sox were on to something and having a pretty good start to the 1975 season.
Yeah, I mean, Lynn played, I think, in about 15 games in the 74 season, and I think he was 18 for 43. Think about that. He batted like 419 in those last games. And, he just picked up where he left off and, winning MVP and Rookie of the Year. I think he's the first ever to do that.
Yeah, he was.
But what's so funny? Do you know how close it was that he wasn't a Red Sox?
I know.
He was drafted by the Yankees in 1970 in the third round, but he turned it down to go to SC. So he could have been a Bronx Bomber and the enemy of the Red Sox. Instead, after SC gets drafted by the Red Sox, he's a Boston legend.
But if you just, looking at his his stats. He obviously had an amazing year in 75, but he actually sort of tailed off as his time went with Boston. I mean, not terribly, just, that's a lot of pressure to put on a guy,
Yeah, well,
especially a young guy, to say, you're going to take a team that hasn't won a World Series in X amount of years, and the two greatest players, arguably one of the greatest players ever, couldn't do it, but you're going to come in and do it. And I don't know how much that affected him emotionally.
I mean, he comes out like gangbusters. He's an all-star right away, 75. He's
Yep.
actually an all-star the first 9 years of his
Yep.
career.
Yep.
79 is his best season by far.
Yep.
But you're right. He wins MVP in 75. Then 76, 77, 78, he has very good years. 79, he has a monster year.
Yep.
Then 80, he has another good year. And then
Goes to the Angels.
Traded out to Angels.
Gets traded
Okay,
to the
right,
Angels.
yeah.
Didn't Fred Lynn, who was the one that hit the grand slam in an all-star game?
Yeah.
Fred Lynn off
Fred Lynn off-
Ackley Hammaker.
Yeah.
Miskey. That's right.
And
that?
I didn't even realize, I completely forgot that Lynn played for the Tigers in 88 and 89 to the end of his career.
Yep.
But you look at, you think that who did the Red Sox get when they traded him to the Angels?
They got Tanana.
Yeah, that's true.
They got Rudy.
Yeah.
And I forget who the third one was.
Jim Dorsey. They also traded Lynn and Steve Renko.
Right.
I mean, and Frank Tanana had been obviously beset by arm injuries. Then went to the Tigers and pitched well for a number of years. But
He
yeah,
reinvented himself.
he did. But I don't know. I mean, when I look at Fred Lynn, I always liked him growing up. I mean, I started baseball right around 75, 76. I always liked him. He just always seemed very friendly and fun. He just knew how to play center field too.
Yeah, he was a fearless center fielder.
Yeah.
The AL East was supposed to come down to the Orioles and Yankees in 75, but they weren't counting on this second-round pick from USC to make such an impact so fast, and he had help. Jim Rice and Dwight Evans were also just getting started. In fact, Rice would go on to finish third in the MVP voting and second in Rookie of the Year. But it was Lynn who would go on to win the American League Most Valuable Player and the Rookie of the Year 50 years ago, the first player ever to do that. It ended up being a magical season for Lynn and the Sox. But as was the case with the Red Sox in those years, magical seasons had a way of still being heartbreaking in the end. And that was the case in 75 as well. Another young guy back in 75 who would also go on to have a Hall of Fame career is Dan Shaughnessy. He grew up just outside of Boston, went to college at Holy Cross, and after a few years in Baltimore, made it back home to Boston and covered the Sox for the Globe starting in 1981. He's written several books, including The Curse of the Bambino and Reversing the Curse Inside the '04 Boston Red Sox, to name just a couple. And Dan Shaughnessy joins us now on the Past Our Prime podcast. Thanks for stopping by, Dan.
Nice to be here with you guys.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Take me back to 75, Dan. You're still just a kid, 20, 21 years old, not covering them as a writer just yet. And Fred Lynn is the next big hope for the Sox. What do you remember about him from those early days in the spring of 75?
So I did have an entry into covering him a little bit that summer because we were right out of college, and the Associated Press had guys for $7. We could go in there and run quotes for Dave O'Hara, the sports editor. So I was happy to do that. So at the age of 21, that summer was the first time I was at Fenway in any professional capacity. $7 a night, and but you could eat and drink at the press room, and but it meant going into the clubhouse, getting quotes, and running upstairs. And we didn't do any actual writing. We might type how the runs were scored, that kind of stuff for the guy. But so it was great way to get into it. And, that was the team of my childhood. And, they got to the World Series in 67. And I don't know, when I was in college, I kind of drifted away from it a little bit. You're busy with your course load. I was working for the school paper and girlfriends and all that stuff. But boy, once I graduated and the team took off right from the jump in 75, and there wasn't a lot expected. They had folded classically in 74. They had like a seven game lead August 23rd and finished 8 games out. Orioles just blew past them. So we kind of had that in our heads already that they would give it up, but this thing sustained, and Lynn and Rice alongside. It was a very, very magical summer. You used the word magical, and it was. And part of that's the age that we were at, and being in Boston, living on your own for the first time, kind of thing. And it was tremendous, and I'll never forget that time in my life. And of course, it intensified as we got into the fall. And Lynn, he had that 10 RBI game against the Tigers early on, and never really thought of a rookie being MVP, but it started to present itself. Nobody was really rushing forward that year, and they were kind of a wire to wire team, American League East. Once we get into May, June, and withstood everything, including the Orioles coming at them in I believe it was late August. They had some classic matchups at Fenway with Palmer and Tiant and all this kind of thing. So yeah, I just have it was a special time in my life. I met my friend Kevin DuPont. We're still both at the Globe. We're both 71 years old, and he's had a wonderful career. He's in the Hockey Hall of Fame, and we're still kicking here at the Globe. But we had one byline in the Globe during the World Series in '75. Gammons, they lost Gammons. I don't know what happened, but he might have been overserved somewhere, or who knows. But there was no World Series notebook before Game 6, and we were there eating the free lobster Newburgh and free drinks and listening to all the old people, and we cobbled it together from the hotel where the World Series gala was, and we have a dual byline at the tagline at the end of that story, which I cherish because it's 50 years old now, and I got to go to the games. At that point, they allowed us to buy tickets, and I did. I remember I took my girlfriend's father to one game, and I took my sister to game 6, and just really, really special. I did not go to Cincinnati, but man, oh man, we were right on it every step of the way.
Well, you can hear in your voice I can see you smiling. It just you can hear those memories coming back to you.
Yeah.
Talk to me about Lynn. He gets a cup of coffee at the end of '74. Now, this is a time that is pre-baseball America. So for the most part, fans don't know the team's top 30 prospects like they do now.
No.
Did he come out of nowhere, or was there inkling of how good he might be? Because he did play pretty well in September the year prior.
Well, we had a jump here because Peter Gammons was the beat guy for the Boston Globe. And I have the good fortune, he's from a small town in Central Mass called Groton. That's where I'm from. My older brother was friends with Gammons as a child. And so when I identified this as a career at Holy Cross, and Gammons is already the beat guy at the Globe, that was great for me. And he was really good to me. He's like 8 or 9 years older. But in that moment, man, it was just he was the best baseball writer of all time, in my view, doing the daily beat, invented that Sunday Notes column that you see everywhere now. And back when game stories really mattered, he did the best ones. His game story off Game 6, the Fisk home run game, it's like the friggin' midnight ride of Paul Revere around here. People can still recite it. I can. And so having Peter in town, yeah, you're right. There wasn't the Baseball America and these ridiculous rankings and over publicizing young prospects, but we knew the top guys because of Gammons. He was keeping us in the loop, and Pawtucket wasn't too far away. And yeah, Rice and Lynn had come up at the end of '74, and when all was lost after this epic collapse, but nobody paid much attention. But then, yeah, I remember in spring training, and there was Bob Ryan was a young columnist at our paper at that time, and him clamoring that if Darrell Johnson had another lineup and there was any chance Fred Lynn wasn't in there, he should be like fired on the spot or something, because Fred Lynn was, he wasn't thought of as an everyday player, certainly in spring training. And but by the time the season got going, it very quickly became clear that Ryan was right. What our eyes told us, he had to be in there every day, and it just grew throughout the summer.
As you mentioned, it wasn't just Lynn. Jim Rice was also a rookie. Did they complement each other? I mean, or did they have similar skill sets?
Well, I mean, Rice wasn't going to be a great defender. It was pretty clear at the time. He was strong. He was bigger than Freddie and strong. Freddie, you see him now. I mean, Freddie has even shrunk. He's smaller now than he was then. We just saw that they had the 50th anniversary, and they all came back to start this opening day. They were all here, and it was good to see everybody. I don't think, Rice, had the look of a guy who might be a 40 home run guy, and but of course Lynn was just such a gifted outfielder, and right away he was making these catches in center field, and you're hearing about Jimmy Pearsall, you're hearing about Dominic DiMaggio, and just he's doing it in New York. You're hearing about Joe DiMaggio, all the stuff, and he was just a beautiful outfielder and like a five-tool guy. But we didn't expect the power numbers, and when you look at it, they didn't hit that many homers. I think Freddie hit 21 or something, and Rice maybe 24. It wasn't a lot, but there was enough, and you could tell they had different personalities, which came to the fore as well. I mean, Jim was very, very shy and not expansive with anything. I think that this was a terrible time in our city with the desegregation and the forced busing that was going on, and Boston was getting a lot of terrible but well-deserved publicity for the resistance to this, and it was understandable resistance. People didn't want their kids going across town, and but there were a lot of media here for that, and for Rice, a country boy from South Carolina, being introduced to the big league career in this climate could not have been a lot of fun for him. And Lynn was just sort of easygoing, but also he was not expansive. He almost clipped, and Yastrzemski was like that. He just didn't give long answers, so we were sort of used to it. So, I mean, if you needed a lot of words, Bill Lee, Louis Tiant, there were Bernie Carbo, there were plenty of George Scott, there were plenty of talkers on that team. But those two, the rookies, were not huge talkers.
So there's kind of a symmetry here because if I'm correct, Fred Lynn was initially drafted by the Yankees in 1970, but opted to go to USC. How different would the fate of those franchises have been in a few years had he decided not to go to SC?
Yeah, it's interesting with the college ball thing because, of course, Rice had a chance to, I'm sure, play college football and do a lot of things, and went right to the professional baseball, and Lynn took that route, and that route is more common today because college ball is so great, really better than the minor leagues at the Division I level. But and USC had the reputation, Rod Dedeaux and all that going on. Richie Dower was out there; he was Rookie of the Year prospect in '77, and later on you had Mark McGuire. That USC program was just. But when Lynn was there, he was football too. He played, I don't know, freshman ball, but he was there with Lynn Swan and guys at SC. Look it up. I mean, he was just a gifted athlete. So that had been part of his college experience. But they were just, he caught up to Rice in the big league in the minor leagues, and they came up together. And I remember Baltimore had a similar thing with Bobby Grich and Don Baylor a couple of years earlier. Just great minor leaguers that were sort of suppressed by all the talent that they had at the big league level and had to wait overly long. Guys wouldn't wait very long with that kind of skills today. They get them up here pretty fast.
He's not alone. We mentioned he had Jim Rice. You have Dewey Evans, another young outfielder in there. I think came up mostly as a starter the year before. He's got a young Carlton Fisk, an older Yastrzemski, and all of a sudden this team has the makings of something. Add in a Louis Tiant and Bill Lee, and playoff baseball in October started to look like a possibility for this team, didn't it?
Yeah, it was. There was a lot there, and Evans had come to the rescue in '72 when he was like 19 or 20. He was called up into the middle of a pennant race. That was a little bit of a abbreviated season because of the strike in early '72, but he ended up in some huge games in September as I guess 20-year-old, and we saw his skills right away, and he kind of went to the background a little bit because of the star power of Lynn and Rice in '75. But when you looked at it, he said, you got these three guys in the outfield, and they're all going to play 15, 20 years. It was pretty remarkable.
I've said as an Oakland A's fan, my first game ever that I attended was game 3 of the ALCS in '75 when the Sox ended the Oakland dynasty in a sweep. Up next, the Big Red Machine for the Sox and what turned into an all-time classic World Series. You mentioned you were there for Game 6. There's sometimes when members of the press, I know you're just a young guy, but like you can just sense that you're in the midst of something special. What was the feeling like that night?
Yeah, that was for me really the last time I was a true fan without the responsibilities or poison of the job of the media where you're not that's kind of gone by the way now, but in 75 you didn't root for the team and you had to be a tough guy and not pretend you didn't care they won or lost. And I've maintained that for 50 years, much to the dismay of a lot of my readers. But yeah, but before 76, I'm still in the stands cheering for the team and all this stuff because I haven't put that professional hat on in a real manner yet. And yeah, it was just I went to the Oakland games 1 and 2 here, which were weekend games, or I can't quite. One was a weekend anyway. I remember Bando hit the wall 4 times, and got 2 singles and 2 doubles out of it in one of those games. And it was just Tiant was masterful, but that A's team, as you know, had won 3 consecutive World Series, so it was a big deal to dethrone them in 3 straight. And Yaz played the outfield, made a good play in Oakland, and Tom Yawkey took the trip to Oakland, the first time he'd flown with the team in a million years, and all those things happened. And then they end up playing the Big Red Machine, and this was a team that the following year would sweep the Yankees in the World Series. So they were hitting their stride. They had played the Orioles in the 70 World Series and played the Mets, I think 72 World Series. So Bench and Perez, Morgan, Rose, this was significant. They didn't have the huge frontline pitching, but they had enough. And Sparky was a Hall of Fame manager, and they had won, I don't know, 108 games or something. So they were certainly favored coming in. And of course, Tiant just stuck it up their butts in Game 1, 6-0. He was a 5-hitter, and they were all complaining because he didn't throw enough fastballs, and they didn't like all the crafty stuff. And there was disputes about how far the wall was because those players hadn't played at Fenway, a lot of them, and a lot of right-handed power with Bench and Perez, and they maintained the wall wasn't 315, and they were right. And I was involved in that years later with measuring it in the dark of night. You weren't allowed to do that, but there was stories about it, and it's now marked as 310. It's 309 and change, but yeah, they knew, and of course it looks closer during BP, and it's so big and all that stuff. But that was a little point of some interest early on in that series.
The Red Sox, of course, as you mentioned, they go on to lose Game 7, and the curse reaches 57 years. And this young nucleus never gets back to the postseason. They come close, and in 78, the famous Bucky Dent HR in the 1-game playoff, another gut-wrencher for the Sox faithful. What do you remember about that horrific afternoon?
Well, by that time, I was full-fledged. I was covering the Orioles for the Baltimore Evening Sun, and I was only 23 or 4. But I was part of the Baseball Rise, and I made the arrangements. The Orioles finished the season in Detroit on that Sunday, October 1, and I booked a flight weeks ahead of time to fly to Boston. I just thought, this looks like it's going in this direction. I want to be ready. And so, yeah, I flew into Boston on Sunday night, and they played Monday, and it was a day game. So it was good to be there ahead of time, and I had plenty of friends to stay with, and we were just having a great old time. And that was a beautiful, perfect October day, and I remember Keith Jackson was the play-by-play guy for ABC that day, which is a weird thing. He's such a football guy, and they had those mustard yellow blazers, and it was just an electric atmosphere of that day, and then having all the life sucked out of Fenway when Torres gave up the 3-run bomb to Bucky Dent after the broken bat, and I remember walking out of Fenway. The Evening Globe in those days would be in the boxes by 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and there it was. It said Sox lead 2-0 after 5 or something like that, and on the front page of the paper, that was what greeted fans as they were walking out of there crying and drunk with disappointment off that game. But I went down to the lower bowl behind home plate and saw, we had to get in the clubhouse when it ended, and that's when Yaz popped up against Gossage, so we were right on top of that. And a lot of Hall of Famers in that game, and just it really played out in very dramatic fashion. All kinds of what ifs for Boston and little subtle things that came up years later. But yeah, that thing that really created, and I wrote The Curse of the Bambino like 10, 12 years later, and all those things were started to set in stone. That was leading up to the Buckner game in Shea Stadium in 1986. But the bad luck and the near misses were coming at us hard at that point, and that gave the impetus to crystallize that in book form, which led to the greatest baseball book title of all time, and launched a million angry New Englanders with The Curse of the Bambino.
And then, of course, you had Reverse the Curse. But is the Yankees-Red Sox rivalry the greatest, maybe, rivalry in sports? And just from my point of view, did it start when Babe Ruth gets sold to the Yankees to finance Nono Nanette and turn the Red Sox away eventually on a Dave Roberts stolen base in the ninth inning in 2004?
Just the arc of the two franchises, that's where there's a big pivot. I mean, you had, in my view, you just go back to the beginning of the American League, and the Red Sox start in 1901, the Highlanders, whatever the Yanks were. So you got these charter franchises, Boston and New York, and Boston won 5 of the first 15 World Series. They were the dominant team at the start of the World Series era and the 20th century. And then the Ruth deal happens after they won their 5th World Series. The Yankees haven't won any. And then after that, the Yanks go on to win like 26 World Series before Boston gets in that circle again. So that's sort of the beginning. And the fact that Ruth goes to New York, the best Boston player, and it was a pipeline. There was kind of a shady relationship with the Boston owner, the New York owner, and the whole team was delivered to New York. And New York sees that and built Yankee Stadium and then just pants the Red Sox for decades after decade. And horrible things, and my whole childhood, that was the Mantle Maris team, Berra, those guys just come in and just kick the shit out of the Red Sox on a regular basis, and they were in all those World Series when I was a child, and so it wasn't there had been a period in the 40s when they were both good, late 40s especially, and again you had late season series that the Sox didn't do well in 48 and 49. David Halberstam wrote a great book, Summer of 49, but you had the DiMaggio Williams thing. So there was a lot of Boston, New York happening from the beginning of the American League through the 40s. And then they both get good again in the 70s. And of course, 78 being that climactic finish for the Yanks. And then even the Shea Stadium thing, it wasn't the Yankees, but it was the New York Mets who denied Boston in 86. And just one thing after another. And that thing, so you ask about the best rivalry. When we got to 2003, 4, 5, that was the best rivalry in sports, no question. And we can go back to, Michigan, Ohio State, and Dallas Cowboys, Steelers, whatever you want to do. But nothing's going to top that for me. And so we really saw it crescendo in 2003, 4, 5, and I don't think it can never match that, the intensity we had then, and the power of baseball at that time, and the star power and the evil empire and just all the things that went down. So yeah, I think certainly in baseball that tops anything, and we'll never get back to that.
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, sorry about that, Dan. I'm joining in late. I'm at a barn with a bunch of 6-year-olds.
Way to go.
If you hear animals in the background, that's because it's either the kids or me or the animals that are wandering. So my apologies. But it is a 100% pleasure to talk to you. I just, man, guys like you got me into sports as a kid. But how are you? But I want to talk about your time. You were a kid. When I came into this barn today, I met a lady who's been here for 40 years. She said she grew up here and loves it. And it reminded me when I looked over you've been doing this. You grew up in the Massachusetts area. You went to college in the area, and you're covering the team that you probably followed your whole life, or teams. How does that feel to be doing it in your backyard? And what type of from watching as a kid, enthusiasm did you have and do you still have to cover the Red Sox and all the other teams in Boston?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. It gives you institutional knowledge. I still tease Bob Ryan. I mean, Bob's 77 years old, and he's been here since 1968, which is, I don't know, 65 years, whatever. But that he's not a native. He's not a local. What can he possibly know? You have to grow up here, and he grew up in Trenton, so that's all he can know. But so it's a way of teasing him. But you have to be a lifer. I'm a lifer. And we know things that no one else can know, and we're proud of it, and we lived it. But that kind of institutional memory stays with you. It serves very well in the capacity of the job that I have, and I'm happy to have it, and pretty much work at this as a professional. And I don't wear the fan hat any longer, but I did when I was a kid. I right up until I was like 18 or 19. So. It's a real benefit when you're doing what I do.
Did you ever feel that first day you walk into, let's say, the Red Sox clubhouse? Was there ever an intimidation factor, or were you like, oh, I got this?
No, there's an intimidation factor because you're young, and again, it depends on your age or who your guys were, but I always had a reverence for the people that were players when I was a child. So as the years went on, if I was interviewing Harmon Killebrew or Hank Aaron or Brooks Robinson, I had a different awe and reverence for those guys because they were gods when I was a child. And I didn't feel the same way about Fred Lynn or Jim Rice. They were my age, so that they're not gods when you're the same age as you. It's certainly today, Shohei Ohtani or Aaron Judge, they're just young people who are really good at baseball. But the ones who always were intimidating for me were the people who were players when I was a kid. And it's been a real privilege to get to know some of them personally, like Jim Cott, Jim Palmer. These guys have been to my house, Jim Lonborg, and they're friends. But the fact that they were players when I was a child is still, I never quite get past that. You're always intimidated by them a little bit.
Toughest interview you've had? I know Scott and Mark and I can talk a story on that. Toughest guys or toughest one you've had to interview?
Well, I mean, everybody's different levels, and some people are just not. If they're not helpful or cooperative, that's kind of okay. I understand that. And, I've had Albert Bell or Manny Ramirez or Eddie Murray or different Kurt Schilling, people that are just difficult, etc. For me, like Nomar was always a hard one for me because he was unnecessarily difficult, and I didn't understand that. He was so great and so young, and he just had a disposition where he hated the baseball media, and I don't know what that was. So that bothered me. I thought he jerked people around and was unnecessarily difficult when all he did was write great things about him because he was a great player.
It's funny you mentioned Jim Cott and stuff, and we had him on the show, and it was funny talking to him about like when baseball games could be played in under 2 hours, which is a lost art now in baseball.
Yeah, Jim's a prince, as you know, and he has a lot of thoughts and all the correct thoughts, and he's been a great touchstone for me. He reads the Globe, he reads us online, and I'm trying to get him to the porch here with some of the other guys that have been over the years, but I mean, what a beast! 16 Gold Gloves, hit 16 homers in the big leagues, won 283 games. I have to tell you, and he's a very humble guy who really sees baseball the right way. And we talked to Jim about his childhood and the way his parents thought about sports, and there was just no overemphasis or overdoing it the way it is today. He just was naturally gifted guy who had all the correct approaches to the game and still does.
1979, Fred Lynn has his best season ever. Hits .333 with 39 homers and 122 RBIs, still playing a great center field, 5 seasons, 5 times an All-Star. The thought must be this guy will retire a Red Sox. And after another fine but injury-plagued season in 1980, the unthinkable happens. A front office blunder makes him a free agent, and the Sox are basically forced to trade him. Tell us what the hell happened.
Yeah, I was covering the Orioles at that time, but we were certainly keeping track of that. And he was such a force. And by that time, Freddie, he'd really become much better with the media, and he was such a gifted player. funny when you read those numbers, you think, why wasn't he MVP? Well, because Baylor knocked in 139 runs that year. I guess that's why. But still, he had a case. He must have been top 3 or 4. In any event, yeah, there was a lot of buffoonery at the top of the Red Sox pyramid at that time. Haywood Sullivan, Buddy LaRue, the Harrington regime, what was going on, and the stewardship of the Tom Yaki's widow. So they lost Fisk over a blunder. These guys, there was blunders, and they got cheap and fiscally responsible and pushed back greatly at the early days of free agency, and was not good for the loyal fans here. And to have those kind of talents and start dealing them off, Burleson was dealt. It was just it was very messy, and the team became boring and stayed for like a 5-year period where they were really not interesting anymore after having so many colorful centerpiece players. It became a very dull time here. The early 80s were not good for the Red Sox. Very, very similar to what we've just experienced here the last 5 years, with 500 team, 3 last place finishes, cheap ownership, giving fans the finger. It feels like that's pivoted in a good way again here now, but it wasn't a good time here the last 5, and those first 5 of the 80s were also bad.
I wanted to go back to that 2004 so the Red Sox are down 3-0 to the Yankees in the series, and it looks like another lost cause. And then Dave Roberts, which seemed like a meaningless steal of second base, but that changed the whole trajectory and then ended the curse for the Red Sox in a sense.
Well, I mean, that thing is still, I've got a left field wall in my backyard here, and the numbers on there represent that moment when he took that bag, because, they were behind by 1 run, but you're right, they were about to be swept, and it was an ignominious finish to a great season of high expectations, and the notion that they were going to get swept in the playoffs. Of course, the year before had been the Aaron Boone home run off Wakefield, and the Sox having a 5-2 lead in Yankee Stadium, 7th game of the ALCS, Pedro on the mound. Unlosable game that they did lose. And that led to going and getting Keith Folk, going and getting Kurt Schilling. They were stacked in 04. And there they were. They found themselves 3-0 down again after losing 19-8 in game 3 at home. Abject humiliation. So it was going to be ugly. And ownership was composing concession speeches and these kinds of things. And the Robert Steele positioned them to have the tying run on second. And of course, Billy Miller, underrated, great player, who banged one up the middle off Rivera, and they tie the game. And then we have this sequence of 4 days. Really, they won 2 games in 1 day, because that was a Sunday night, which was won on Monday morning. And then they play a forever game the next afternoon, and then go to New York and beat them 2 more times. That's the single greatest sports story I've ever covered, because of the 86 years that led up to the moment and all the near misses and the biblical nature of a Boston team beating a New York team after 86 years, doing it at their expense. Still the only team to come back from 3-0 in the history of 7-game series in Major League Baseball. And it happens to be the Sox against the Yankees. To do it at their expense is just beyond. You literally couldn't make it up. It's too good. And that's why there were so many books were written, and it lives on forever. Pictures of that season, and the Veritek A-Rod fight and all that stuff. It's just never forgotten here, and still the best. We've had 13 championship parades in this century in Boston, and that's the one. Even with the Patriots winning 6 and Brady and Belichick and all the great things here, that's the one that's the most special, biggest parade. That's the one that had people going to cemeteries and leaving mementos at gravestones of loved ones who never lived to see it. So that's the one, and forever will be.
And there's one memory that I have. I got to go back a little bit. 1986, when you're playing the Angels, and Dave Henderson hits a shot. What did it feel like then? The jubilation, and then you go fast forward a week or so, and then the hurt of the Buckner play. What do you remember about those two?
Yeah, 86 playoffs, and the Mets had a whopper with Houston, so there had been tremendous. That's one of the greatest postseasons in the history of baseball, and the Boston Anaheim thing was epic. We were there, and the Sox had been a surprise team, pretty much wire to wire, and they find themselves in that position where they're down 3-1. They're down 5-2 in the 9th inning. It's over. So, and then we had, Buckner hit a single up the middle and Baylor hit a 2-run homer. It's 5-4. I think Boggs or somebody got on, and Dave Henderson was a sweet, sweet guy. He's already passed away, and we loved him. He was a wonderful guy. He had had a great attitude, great, great personality, sunny guy, and really skilled. He's a great football player, and so he was kind of always oblivious. He didn't feel the moment and feel the pressure, and he looked bad in a couple swings, and then hit the home run off Donnie Moore. They win in extras. They come home and beat him 2 more times. So they end up being remembered as chokers, as the cataclysmic fall in Game 6 of the World Series, 6 and 7. But in effect, they had done the same thing to the Angels a week earlier, and that was Gene Mauch, who could never get in the World Series, and all the bad luck of the Angels at that time. But yeah, back to back to have those series play out is just beyond belief. I was working on a book that year. The book's called One Strike Away. Nobody bought the book, but it's a thrilling book about all the stuff that happened at the end of that season, because we were not expecting, that team had been 500 the year before. Clemens had had surgery. He was 24 years old. No one knew what was going to happen, and he ended up being MVP, Cy Young, 24 wins, and just a breakout year. The whole thing was a breakout year for Boston baseball.
We're talking with the 2016 J.G. Taylor Spink Award winner, given out by the Baseball Hall of Fame, which is awarded to baseball writers who have devoted their lives to covering this sport we love. Well deserved, Dan. I looked up Mr. Taylor Spink. I had no idea who he was. Basically, he was the founder of the Sporting News. So thank you to Mr. Taylor Spink, because we all loved the Sporting News, that's for sure. The Fred Lynn reminds me, he gets traded and the Sox go into a tailspin. And the same thing happens when Mookie Betts gets traded. Both of these guys would be considered what you call faces of the franchise. Do you see a parallel between the two?
Well, the Betts one, as great as Fred Lynn was, and as great as that summer of 75 was, he never really got into the pantheon. To me, the Betts thing is, he was MVP once, but Betts won the World Series. And it was a disgraceful trade, strictly because they wouldn't pay him, and the return was nothing. I mean, it was it was embarrassing. And then they went into this horrible 5-year spin, 3 last place finishes, overall 500 ball, just dull. And it's 100 years to the years as the Babe Ruth thing. Ruth won the World Series in 1918 and is traded after 1919, and Betts won the World Series in 2018, is traded after 2019, and horrible things have happened since then. So they got a lot of another 95 years to dig out of that one. But the Betts one gets compared to the Ruth one in a big way around here, and the Lynn one becomes more of a footnote. There was so many things going wrong at that time. Because as we stated earlier, Burleson was traded. They lost Fisk. It was just messy time, and kind of a forgettable time for the Red Sox.
I'm calling it the curse of Mookie.
Yeah, that's got some juice around here.
Yeah. So Fred goes to the Angels, has some more good years in Anaheim, but his fearless play starts to result in some injuries. He was never the superstar once he left Boston. Still good, but not great. Do you have a theory why his play was never the same once he left Boston?
Well, I think 2 things. Fenway Park's one thing, and injuries were the other thing. But certainly, if he had stayed here, his production would have been as good or better. He was a great Fenway hitter. He used that left field wall, inside out hitter, a lot of power to left center. And it was weird. He's a California guy. It was the whole laid back thing, and maybe he didn't think that mattered to him. And then he ends up in markets where baseball was not as big a deal, including California, where he's from. But he never had the fervor here or the passion of the fans, and he appreciates it now more than he did when he played here. He's become a great Red Sox alum. He's around a lot, goes to the Legends Suite and signs autographs, and he's just been a great ambassador for them. Way more personable and outgoing than he was as a player, and really kind of has great fond memories of that time. I don't think he has bad memories of Detroit or Baltimore or Anaheim, but nothing like here. He identifies as a Sox. But the injuries also, it was a lot to sustain. But yeah, that's a Hall of Fame track. I mean, Nomar had that Hall of Fame track. I mean, guys guys have it, and injuries generally are what takes them off that. And in his case, it was definitely the injuries.
So you've got the real trifecta today. Normally we do these interviews from a studio in Pasadena, but I think Scott's at his home in South Pasadena. I'm in a hotel room in New York, and Bill's in a barn with some 6-year-olds. I don't know where. So we're kind of hitting you from a different point of view. But we do a segment here called a trivia segment called 50-50. I'm going to give you a 50% chance to get this question right, and it's going to center around Fred Lynn. So I don't know. Do you remember there used to be a show called Fantasy Island?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. True or false? Fred Lynn, and the only time he ever did anything where he wasn't playing, where it wasn't like a documentary or something, actually appeared in an episode of Fantasy Island.
I believe that's probably true.
It is true. First season, May 25th, 1978, it aired. Not only was Fred in it, but Tommy Lasorda, Steve Garvey was in it as well. Both Brett brothers were in it, and it centered around Gary Berghoff, who played Radar and MASH, wanted to be a baseball player, and he was a pitcher, and he's striking all these guys out. And Fred's line after getting struck out was, "And I thought Nolan Ryan was tough."
That's pretty good. I like that.
Yeah. So there's your trivia for the day.
Hey, Dan, it's been 44 years since you started at the Globe, but with Gammons and Ryan and DuPont, are you still considered the new guy?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it could never catch up. Bob started in '68 here, and and Peter's 80 years old, and they're just great institutions, and I see them all the time, and they're wonderful sources, wonderful friends, and so important in our careers. So yeah, it's been a special, great ride, and I feel very blessed to have been able to do the career here.
Hey, man, we love talking baseball, and with guys like you, we grew up reading your stuff, and it's been just a pleasure, and I thank you for coming on and sharing some thoughts about that great 75 season for Fred Lynn and the Sox.
Well, I enjoyed it, fellas. You guys take care.
Fred Lynn, the first player to ever win MVP and Rookie of the Year in the same season. Mark, who was the other?
Oh, God, that one Rookie of the Year and MVP. Oh, man, this can be, I know this answer.
I'll give you the year.
What?
I'll give you the year.
Okay.
2001.
Oh, God, 2001. I'm going to feel really ridiculous for not knowing this answer. Nomar?
A little bit of a trick question because he wasn't truly a rookie.
Huh.
Kind of a hint.
He wasn't truly a rookie, but he won rookie. So he was an older player.
Ichiro.
Oh, man.
Yes.
I feel ridiculous for not knowing that. Yes. You gave me all the clues.
Right? I tried, man. I tried to bring you to the finish line.
I'm an idiot. What can I say?
Let's talk a little more baseball, shall we, guys? Bill, what do you got?
Yeah, just Henry Aaron. He had a 114 batting average. So he removed himself from the lineup for the first time in his 21-year career and became a designated hitter. But then he came back pretty good because he broke up Pat Dobson's shutout with his 735th career home run.
He would go on to hit 20 more, and that would be it. 755. Mark, how are your Tigers doing?
Well, the Tigers are in first place in the American League East at 7-5, and they better enjoy that because it's going to get pretty ugly from this point on, especially the summer of 75. So I'm going to enjoy their first place standing early in the season right now.
We'll keep track on that. That's gonna be like the stock market pretty soon, going one direction.
Going down, 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 down.
ABA semifinals between the Indiana Pacers and the Denver Nuggets, who were favored to win it all. But George McGinnis, Billy, he has something to say about that, doesn't he?
Yeah, George McGinnis was just, to me, and it's odd that I would follow him. I always liked George McGinnis. I didn't follow the ABA. Mark knows a lot about the ABA.
Oh, yeah.
But I looked over his stuff and I thought, here's a guy that's a 3-time ABA All-Star. He was an ABA Most Valuable Player, won 2 titles in the ABA, and he was also a 3-time NBA All-Star. But I think when he got to the NBA, he was overlooked. Just basically overlooked because he played with Dr. J. I don't think they realized the greatness of him. Mark, you remember the ABA. How great was McGinnis?
Well, he was Indiana Pacers' first superstar. Before there was a Reggie Miller in Indiana, there was George McGinnis. And he was one of the top players in the ABA then. And the Pacers were one of the dominant teams in the ABA, which maybe is why they got into the merger. Because if you think about it, why did Indiana be one of the 4 teams that got merged into the NBA?
Yeah.
Yeah, McGinnis was a hell of a player, and the ABA was such a fun league, even though you hardly could see it on television. Very rarely could you get your game.
And you think back now to Indiana basketball because Indiana's a hotbed of basketball. And
Yeah.
the fact they were so good in the NBA and bringing in the ABA and bringing back championships, and only been able to go to the NBA finals one time in all the years.
Yeah. And they won 2 ABA championships, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're looking to go to another one here if they can get past Denver. This is a weird series. Indiana's up 3-2. It would end up going 7 games. The winner, the home team, won just 2 of the 7. The winner of the series gets Artis Gilmore, Dan Issel, and the Kentucky Colonels. So some big names in the ABA. They really had in fact, I didn't know this, but Kentucky ends up winning the ABA championship, and they challenged the Golden State Warriors to a series, and the NBA wouldn't allow it. So
wow,
that would have been interesting, wouldn't it?
Oh, what rules do you enforce? 3-point shot wasn't in the NBA yet. They
Yeah.
didn't borrow that from the ABA. So whose rules are you using?
Yeah, then just a little off note, you think that they're playing the Colonels with Dan Issel, and Dan Issel gets retired as a Denver Nugget.
That's right.
So, there's a guy that, made his career in the NBA by being a Nugget, but he was pretty good there in Kentucky as well.
He sure was. For the record, while Jimmy Connors was winning his challenge match against John Newcomb, his fiance or former fiance or ex-fiance, whatever she is this week, Chris Evert won her 3rd singles title in a row, defeating Martina Navratilova yet again, 7-5, 6-4. She wins $25,000 for winning the Family Circle Cup tournament. So Jimmy and Chris dominating tennis. Bill, what do you got?
Bruce Jenner won the decathlon at the Drake relays, if I get that out. And you think about it, because when I was a kid, Bruce Jenner was on Wheaties boxes. He won the decathlon in the 76 Olympics. But to think 50 years ago, and now today, he's now Caitlyn Jenner. So the thought that, if you went back to him then and said, well, in 50 years, you're going to be named Caitlyn. I wonder, his thoughts on that.
And he stole my daughter's name, except
he did.
He
did that on. That's why he got changed, Mark.
Yeah, he almost spelled it the exact same way as she does. Not quite.
Yeah, I knew there was a reason. I knew it.
Faces in the crowd, Mark.
I've got Jim Barbays, a shortstop for Madison College in Virginia, which we now know as James Madison. And he was a pretty good player. While he played at James Madison, you know what the team's record was? 112-37. Wow. That's almost an 82% winning percentage. Okay. And they were Division II back then. So dominant program and player in the program. And then he got drafted and he ended up playing in the Texas Rangers system for a bit, but never really made it to the majors.
Bill.
Debbie Kinney. She's a swimmer from Weed Sport in New York. She's the first girl. There was no girls team, so she was the first girl ever named to the boys all conference team. That's pretty impressive.
Very impressive.
Yeah, she won like the 200 and 500 yard free titles. Just quite amazing in that day and age. Because remember, well, they used to say in the Little League that if the girls played, they could get breast cancer and things like that. But Debbie sure seemed to overcome a lot of odds to become a swimmer on the boys team.
Oh yeah, if boys play, everything will be fine. But if the girls play, we're looking at pandemic.
Exactly, they die, and there's no babies anymore in the world. Yeah.
19th hole, William E. Carsley of Chicago is not happy. Having endured the arrogance and boorishness of Howard Cosell, the babbling banalities of Kurt Gowdy, the mealy-mouthed mumblings of Chris Schenkel, and the phony pedantry of Tony Kubek and Al de Ragodas for the past decade, I think just about anyone would be an improvement, and that includes almost any female commentator, whether she be Jeannie Morris, Jane Chastain, Bella Abzug, or Katharine Hepburn. How could they possibly be more inept than what the networks have been forcing on us? So he's a happy camper, seems to really like watching the sports back then. And Bill, you have one as well.
Well, Richard Weinberg, I don't think he's with the women here. He said, come on, true, there are inept male announcers, but women sportscasters who laud Pete Moraviak or worse, Annalisa LaJane Chastain are still the rule rather than the exception. Until this situation is reversed, you'll find me watching the lovely Liz Bishop with the sound off and the local radio broadcast, sportscast on.
He's
Yeah.
canceled.
Yeah, yeah.
And who was this?
Richard C. Weinberg. So
Oh,
Dick
No,
C.
Rich Weinberg. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yep. Yep. Dick C. Weinberg.
Dick Weinberg. All right.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Who
There you
cares
go.
what you think?
Right. Hey, that's going to wrap up our look back at the world of sports from May 5th, 1975. Jimmy Connors was on the cover, but Fred Lynn was our topic. Want to thank the Boston Globe's Dan Shaughnessy for coming on and talking with us about that phenomenal rookie season by Freddie Lynn. Next week, it's Derby time. We're running for the roses. Bill and I will be clothed. Mark will be streaking to a photo finish.
Yeah, that's great.
And I don't think he wins it by a nose.
Not a nose.
Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. We are past our prime.